Hi, in this video we're going to look at a couple of more advanced selection functions. Namely, we're going to look at how to select data from a different sheet and how to include absolute references and what they mean. So to start with, I've created a little table for my school store. It includes the item names, my cost, and my sale price. Now I'm going to move over to another sheet and I'd like to pull those item names across. So in order to do that, I'm going to click in the cell, I'm going to hit equal, jump back to the first sheet, and click on the appropriate cell. So I was in cell A2 on the other sheet, and now I'm picking A2 here. Now you don't technically have to, it doesn't have to be the same cell, but if you're organized that way, it's going to make it easier for you. And you can see the word erasers came across. You can also say that the formatting did not come across, and that if I extend past the bottom where there's no more data, it's going to give me this 0 value. Now there are ways to suppress that, but we're not going to look at them now. So the first thing I might do is delete that, grab my formatting tool to clean this up, and there we go. Maybe I'll select that and put some boxes in so it's nice and formatted. Now in this section, I'm going to enter the number of items of each item that I sold for each of these months. So let's say the erasers I sold, well, it's September, so people are going to need things. So I'll say 14. Folders I sold 20. Notebooks I only sold 6. Pencils 22. And pens 25. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here for a second so that you don't have to watch me type additional numbers. Okay, in this yellow series of cells, I'm going to calculate my cost for these items. So cost would simply be an equal sign to indicate I'm going to use a formula. The number of items times my cost per item, which can be found over on this other sheet. Now I just hit enter, and that should be giving me my total cost. And let's format that as, I'll right click, format cells, and I'm going to do that as currency, and we'll look at that more in another video. Now, what I should be able to do is simply drag these down so they increment. So in other words, this is saying B3, which is here, times this other sheet B3. Let's see if that's correct. Yes, that is my folder cost. So that should be adequate for calculating my total cost on these items. Now when I go to drag across to fill in the rest of my cells, I'm going to run into a problem. And the problem is this. As I drag it across, you can see that not only does it want to change the row, not only does it want to increment the row from 2 to 3, but it wants to increment the columns from B to C. And if I come over here, my cost column does not change. So what I really like to do is I'd like to be able to lock in the columns so that the column remains B while the row will still increment as needed. So let's see how to do that. Now keep in mind that we do want these columns to increment. In other words, we want September to match September over here, October to match October over here, etc. What we don't want to change, or have change, is this column, so that it moves from cost to sale price on. So we've got to keep that straight. Let's look at our formula. When we look at our formula, this B2 is referring to this B. So as we move across, we do want B2 here for October to be C2 and for November to be D2. So we want this first value to increment both by column and by row. But this reference to the select sheet, which is my other sheet, we want this B, this column, to remain locked while the rows increment. So let's see how to do that. When you want to make an absolute reference, either by row or column or by both, you add a $sign in front of the thing that you want to lock. So now what I'm saying is on the select sheet, when I drag across, do not change B to C to D to E. However, since there's no $sign in front of the 2, that will continue to increment. So here, let me drag it back down so it updates my formula. Now there'll be no change here because it's still referring to the original set of data, to the B column and to this column. However, when I drag it across, you can see that these cells contain formulas where this reference has not incremented as to column. Okay, that can be a little confusing, so we're going to run through it again. But just keep in mind that $sign keeps the row or the column from changing. Okay, so let's see. So this is my cost. Now, let's find out what my total sales were. Now, total sales would equal the number of items I sold times my sale price, which can be found over here. It's just in the C column. Hit enter. Now, I know right off the bat that I'm not going to want that C column in the second reference to increment. So I'm going to add the $sign. Ooh. Let me copy over some formatting here so it's in currency. Now when I drag down, and notice now that I'm on cell J4, my reference is still good. It's B6, which is here, times C6 on the other sheet over here, C6. So that's perfect. But the $sign copied down, so it didn't really affect anything yet because I'm not changing columns, I'm only changing rows. Now if I select notice that even though I'm referring to E10 over here, it's to E6 over here, it's C6 on the other sheet because we didn't allow that column to increment. Okay, let's do one more set of calculations where we can look at what if we want to set something up where it doesn't increment in either direction. So let me insert some rows. Copy that out, and maybe I'll change the background color a little bit. There you go. Get you some cell borders. Okay, now let's take our total sales for the month and multiply it by the tax. Okay, total sales times the tax to find out how much tax we have to collect in addition to this. Okay, so I'm going to say please equal my total sales. In this case, I don't have to jump to another sheet, times the tax rate. Now this won't be the total price, it'll be just the tax. If I wanted the total price, I would have to maybe do something like okay, we'd have to take this plus this times the 7%. But for now, let's just get the tax. So my tax was 39 cents on that. Now, the thing is, if I drag this way, you can see that it doesn't work because it starts to try to take S2, S3, S4, so that's not going to work. It can't increment by rows. And if I drag it this way, I have the same problem because it's trying to increment by columns. So what I want to do is lock that in both directions. And what I can do to do that is simply put the $sign in front of the S and the dollar sign in front of the 1. Now that reference won't change. It's called an absolute reference. And just as a double check, let's take this cell M6 equals M6 times this. So that should turn out to be the equivalent of 35 cents. It should be exactly the same because I'm doing the same thing. I just haven't done it with these formulas. I'm doing it manually as a check. And there you go, 35 cents, same thing. And it's always a good idea to do something like that. Once you've done your calculations and you've got your formulas, it's a good idea to do a check here and there to make sure that you've got the formulas correct. Okay, last thing I want to show you is if you do want to make an absolute reference, so I'm going to say equals, at this point I'm just going to say equals the tax. There is a quicker way to put those dollar signs in. And that's while you select it or immediately after you select that cell, hit the F4 key and you'll notice that the dollar signs jump in up here for both column and row. If you hit the F4 key again, it'll shift so that only the rows are made absolute references. If you hit it again, it becomes only the columns. And if you hit it again, it goes back to not being an absolute reference. And you can see I can cycle through those, and that's a little quicker. Since I don't need this, I'll just escape. Okay, that's how to select across sheets and use absolute references.